Yep. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It. I'm your host, Twitch Johnson. So grab your substance and your drinks, or stay sober-minded, if you will. Let's start the show. So you can follow any shorts, or you can follow this episodes on Spotify. You can follow it on Instagram at Twitch Johnson underscope. That's TWISTJOHNSON underscope, or Let's Talk underscope 2025. I know you see this young lady that we have inside the screen right now. We'll get to that, but you know what I like to do? The current events that nobody asked for. All right, so today's story, we have one dead dozen sick after eating roasted eel from Japanese department store. Okay, so nearly 150 people were sick after eating the eel prepared in a chain restaurant sold at a department store. Among them were two that needed medical attention. Japan has a tradition of roasted eel as a tonic for heat when it gets hot and on hot days. A woman that was 90 years old was amongst the dozen that was hospitalized, and she was pronounced dead. There is no real and actually no actual cause of death, and it's still being investigated. So the people who are still seeking a medical attention, they are still investigating the systems of the food. The restaurant, however, remains in operation, and they were deemed that there was nothing that they did on their cause. You let me know how you feel about that in the comments about people catching food poisoning and people dying from the ill. So with that being said, we're going to introduce our person that we have with me today.
Hello.
Hello. So you can introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and you can tell us what do you do a little bit in the basic form, and then after that, we'll do out the pour out and pour up.
Sounds good. So my name is Chrystal Adair Benning. I own a company called Word Magic Copywriting Inc. And I am a 4 times New York Times bestselling ghostwriter, book coach. I do book writing retreats across the globe, and I also do copy. So anything word magic is kind of my jam.
Love that. So who you want to pour out or pour up for?
Oh, I mean, listen, the world lost an incredible human this week. A gentleman who was the founder of Giftology. He passed suddenly this week, left behind 4 young girls and a wife. That's definitely been on my mind these days. And for somebody I want to pour up for, I'm going to give it to my husband. Like, my husband is doing some really cool things these days, and he's really killing it in the financial market. He's just about to launch a hedge fund in the US. So I'm really proud of him. So there you go.
Shout out to hubby. And with that being said, let's pour up.
Let's do it.
Let's pour up for him.
I love
Okay.
it. Let's do it.
All right. So Crystal, tell us in more in depth, what is it like to be a ghost writer for authors and books?
Oh gosh. I mean, I started when I was my very first book was actually um, kind of a misadventure, if you will. I was working in radio. Somebody was offered a job to have a book done. An agent had approached them, and a publisher had approached them about writing this book. They didn't know how to write. They were actually dyslexic and couldn't write, really struggled to even read. So they obviously couldn't do their own book. And at the time, I was doing all the research for the show. So I got asked if I would write the book. So that was my very first kind of foray. I didn't know what I didn't know. I'd never written a book before. I was 14. But I wrote the book. It got published 2 weeks before I turned 16 and immediately went to the New York Times bestseller list. And long story short, this person tried to not pay me. We had a verbal contract, not an official contract. She tried not to pay me, and instead offered to pay me in dog food. Did not go over well.
Not cool.
But it led to an incredible career because the publisher that had given her the book deal actually heard about what had happened, took me under their wings, and trained me up for everything that I needed to know. So now my thing that I do is I work specifically with coaches usually, or business people, and I write business books or memoir/business books that help them take their intellectual property, the thing they know better than anybody else, and put it into a book format so that they have a legacy. And it helps to shine a light on their message, their wisdom, And it's just like a really cool feeling. But I get paid purely to be a ghost. My name is not attached to the book. I rarely get mentioned. If ever get mentioned, it's all hush hush who I write for.
Hmm.
And I get a paycheck. They get a best-selling book and jump on Oprah's couch. That's
Sweet.
the
So, how does the compensation work as far as books? Is it can you get a wage or salary, or is this commission only? It's by the project that you produce, whatever the information,
yeah.
and then you come up with a quote. How does that work?
Sort of. So it depends on where you come in and what you're doing. So if a publisher comes to me to work with me, the publisher typically has a number in mind that they're willing to pay a ghostwriter. They will offer the project at a certain price. I have the opportunity to say yay or nay on said
Hmm.
project. And typically, I also make a number of sales commissions on the back end for book sales. So
Hmm.
as that book does really well, as it hits the New York Times bestseller, I'm getting residuals of it,
Hmm.
which is a great thing. Some of my other clients, if they come to me and they're going to self-publish or they're looking to use it for a marketing book, it's usually a flat fee. I don't charge commission on the back end. I'm not taking any of their money afterwards. And so you pay a little bit higher price point to start with me, but you're not paying me anything for the rest of your days. Like it's a one and done. Like you pay me, you're gone, enjoy your book. Versus a publisher where I can get residual checks. I'm still getting residual checks for a book that I wrote when I was 15, if that makes sense, right? Like I'm still getting residuals, and I'm 43 this year, so
That
a
does
long
make
time to
sense.
collect residuals.
You have you ever written any books yourself?
I have. So I worked with a publisher, gosh, about a decade ago, and the publisher, incredible human, her and I had a wonderful experience. But she literally was like, Chrystal, I'm not going to publish any more of your clients' books until you write one of your own. You've got some great stories that deserve to be told. So I did write my own story. I did sell it. I published it under a niche publisher, not one of the big five. I didn't want the something fun about ghostwriters, like we don't like taking the credit. That's not why we do it. I do it for the work. Like I love money. I love writing. I love the act of learning about people and really getting in depth in their intellectual property. I'm not doing it because I want to stand on Oprah's couch. So we released it, small batch, very small batch. I sold about 10,000 copies of my book when it was released. And then I promptly pulled it off shelves. So it's actually really hard to find a copy of my book unless you got it from back in the day when it was launched. Mostly because the story that I told was super specific to that time in my life. I talked about I am a four-time cancer survivor. I used to be an event planner and specifically a wedding planner. I filed for bankruptcy, got married, got divorced, all in the span of a decade of working events, right? So I wrote this incredible story about my life up to that point. But when I left events, which was a few years later, when I left events and when I didn't want to be known as the cancer girl anymore, the book needed to go. It was time. So the book was officially only on shelves for about 5 years before I pulled the plug. So it does exist. It's just really hard to find these days.
I mean, I would have loved to read that book. So as far as projects go, what would be the reservations as far as you turning down a project?
Oh gosh. So a lot of people think that when they come to a ghostwriter that they just show up and they're like, "Hey, I want to write a book about fill in the blank," right? They think that they just come with an idea and then they pay me money and they don't have to do anything and I'm just going to magically come up with this book. And that's not the way the process works at all.
Okay.
For like 99% of the books that I work on, really what happens is it's a very collaborative approach. So we work collaboratively throughout the week, throughout the months, getting your book to market. So, my clients have a direct WhatsApp to me. So they message me throughout the day and at nights. If I have questions, I'm messaging them. We have regular scheduled meetings every week. So the process is really you come with an idea. I sit down and help you flesh it out. I'm like, okay, this is a great idea, but we need to include X, Y, and Z. This is important. And then I send you away for homework to go find me the data, find me the details that I need to complete that. So, especially if I'm writing somebody's memoir, I didn't live your life. I don't know what your life looked like. So, the memoir that I'm working on right now is a woman who was born and lived in South Africa during apartheid, was literally there at the emancipation of Nelson Mandela, moved to the UK where she married a black man, whole bunch of racial problems there. Then moved to Australia where she divorced the black man in a time when divorce was not a thing and remarried an Indian man and had to deal with the racism and the gender issues and inclusivity and diversity. Now, keep in mind, I'm 43. I was not around during any of that. I have no, other than like what you can read in a textbook, I have no knowledge of what it was like to be around when Nelson Mandela was emancipated. That is not part of my makeup. I wasn't there. I don't have a realization. So what she has to do is actually have those conversations with me all the time about the subject matter so that I can ask questions and say things like, the day he was emancipated, what was South Africa like? What did it feel like? What did it sound like? What did it smell like? Were people on the streets? Were people hiding out in their homes? Like, I get to ask all the great questions. So like I get to relive history through somebody direct who experienced it. And in business books, it's the same process because typically you're writing a book about something you teach. So for me, I get almost the master class to what it is that you do because you have to teach me so that I can write it. You
Right.
can't just come in and be like, we're going to write a book on quantum time jumping, for example, and expect me to know what it is that you want in a book about quantum time jumping. You would have to sit down and explain to me how you learned it, how you use it, what tools can we give somebody, how do we get there. So I get these incredible like university, like master's degree level classes from the
Mm-hmm.
people I write for. So my favorite part of my job is the fact that I never stop learning. I learn really cool things and get to hear behind the scenes stories of stuff every single day of my life. So when I turn somebody down, it's often because that process doesn't feel like it's going to be easy, enjoyable, fun, or connected. Like if we're having an initial meeting and you're already being kind of sketchy about your topic and you're like, yeah, I want to write this, but no, I don't want to go like find you the research and do this stuff. It's probably not a good fit because I need somebody legitimately that I like them and they like me because this is a relationship. And at the bare minimum, my clients work with me for 90 days, so 3 months. Longest, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 months to 3 years, we got to be basically besties. Like I need to be in your brain for 3 months to 3 years, depending on what we're writing. So relationship is the number one thing that I do to make sure that it's right for me. The second is depending on the topic, is the topic something I actually just got excited about? Like when you tell me what you want to write, did I get a little tingle down my spine? Did my intuition kind of
Right.
like cue up and go, "Oh, that's going to be good. I want to be part of that." If it didn't, it's probably not for me. It doesn't mean we can't work together. It does mean that I'm probably not your ghostwriter.
Mm-hmm.
I might be your book coach. I might be your book writing retreat instructor and teach you how to do it, but I'm probably not the person who's good to write it because the number one thing I think you need is A, I mean, somebody who's a great writer, but B, it's all about relationship. Do you actually like
Absolutely.
this person? Do you like their voice? Do you like what they're about?
I
All
want
that.
to say, I feel like when it ties into music, there's a lot of artists that have ghostwriters because they
Yeah,
get writer's block or they run out of material and they want to stay
totally.
relevant. When we're going into the authors and the book journeys in that industry, do you feel that a lot of authors utilize their ghostwriters? Are the authors actually the narrators of their books, or this is the reason why you are employed in that direction?
Yeah,
Because
I
the
think it's
ghostwriters.
I think it's a mixture of both, right? So we do end up with some people who are incredible writers who come in and don't lean on their ghostwriter much, except that like they need us to help them fill out the story and tell them what's important and what's not
Okay.
important, right? You also end up with people who are horrible storytellers on paper because you got to
Hmm.
remember people that can speak for a living, podcasters, radio people, musicians, anybody that's on TV or the media, somebody that stands on stages. That's a different medium from
Hmm.
writing. We write a book very differently from the way we speak verbally. So
Okay.
I always joke that sometimes I'm not the best verbal person when it comes to explaining what I do, but
Okay.
on paper, I know I'm the best. I know I'm amazing at what I do, and I can take your story and put it onto paper. Other people are the opposite, right? They're really great on stage, but we hand them a sheet of paper and it's just gobbledygook and it doesn't make sense. So
Right.
I think you have to find that like fine line for people. But writer's block is real for a lot of people.
Okay.
And when it happens, the best thing you can do is either have a ghostwriter or have a book coach. I'm
Mm.
actually a big proponent of more people need to write their own books and just have book coaches personally. I think
Okay.
there's an audience for ghostwriting, but ghostwriting, just like, let's throw a number here. Ghostwriting starts in my world at like 40,000 US for
Mm.
3 months, and it goes up from there. And if you want a New York Times bestseller, we're talking six figures plus.
Mm.
Anybody who's working with me on book coaching, the lowest price point in book coaching is like 10 grand. So it's a much easier price point for people if they're like, hey, I think I could do this. I just need a lot more guidance. Cool,
Mm.
take book coaching. And what I find is that people are happier usually with the end product. Not that my writing is bad, it's amazing, but they love the product more because they physically touched it and they put their blood, sweat, and tears on the page. And I just guided the process to say, hey, I love this, but like I need more detail. Or, oh, you just kind of skimmed this part, but that's important. Like we need to know that. Or in a business book, oftentimes people forget, like they can't go back and understand how they learn something. So when
Mm.
they're teaching it to somebody, they're like, oh, yeah, you just do this and then this happens. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's like 6 steps in between. What are the 6 steps in between? Because you can't just do that and have that happen. So we need to reverse engineer it. And my job is to help them do that. So being a ghostwriter, honestly, is like 9 times out of 10, it's strategy and coaching somebody into the right storytelling framework. That's really my goal.
Right, like you already stole the questions out of my mouth. Like the questions were like, what would be like a ballpark for financially hiring a ghostwriter? You touched on that and
Yep.
touched on what it is for coaching. Have you had any workshops or seminars or forums that you conducted for people who are interested in being a ghostwriter?
I don't specifically focus on people who want to be a ghostwriter. I tend
Okay.
to focus more on the actual entrepreneurs that are looking to do a book. So I call them creations. I run them 3 or 4 times a year. They're all over the world, where I basically bring people together for a long weekend. We get together on a Thursday afternoon. We're done on a Sunday afternoon, and I teach them how to write a book. I give them my framework and I actually workshop their book with them. So that's one of the ways I do it. I also have a virtual retreat that's the same thing that I work them through. I don't typically teach ghostwriters. I want to teach business owners and
Mm.
speakers how to like translate what they know, what they're so brilliant about, onto the page so that they can make more money and have more impact with what it is that they do for a living.
Love that. What kind of businesses have you worked with or entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So I do a lot of work with coaches.
Okay.
They're my favorite humans on earth. I love coaches. They're some of my favorite people. Mostly because coaches use what I deem coach speak,
Okay.
right? So they get in their own, and we all do this. Doctors have their own language, mechanics have their own language, right? But they get in their own language pattern and nobody understands what they're talking about. So for
Got you.
example, I'm working with a coach and a coach is like, I'm an NLP trained, ENLP trained, quantum time release coach. Do you, as somebody who is not one of those things, have any idea what I just said? Probably
No.
not, right?
Probably
I
not.
just because the coach just spewed coach speak at me, and the regular human who actually could benefit from what they do doesn't have a clue what
Right.
they're
I
even
just heard
talking.
acronyms. Like, what does this mean?
Exactly. You were like, that was a whole lot of letters. Cool.
Right.
So my job is to break those letters down into tangible facts. So NLP, for example, is neuro linguistic programming. What does that actually mean? It means emotional intelligence trainings.
Okay.
They're emotionally intelligent trained coaches, and or they are trainers of emotional intelligence. ENLP is evolved NLP, so it's going from the conscious level of emotion into the subconscious or unconscious level of emotion, and dealing with trauma and challenges in your life from an unconscious level. So
Mm-hmm.
people that want to quit smoking, hypnosis, for example,
Oh
is an
wow.
example of ENLP coaching, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then somebody that works in quantum time release, which is a whole other ball game. Quantum time release, for example, is actually a building block tool that unlocks subconscious blocks, emotional blocks
Mm-hmm.
for people. And you don't have to revisit trauma. You don't have to revisit the event that it occurred in. You don't have to re-traumatize yourself. You can literally let go of anger, fear, um, and a whole bunch of other challenging emotions, essentially,
Okay.
that you can become more emotionally stable so that you're better able to handle what happens in your life. That's my job. My job is to go, okay, cool. All those words that you just said, let me translate it into what somebody actually cares about it and then turn it into a book. So I love working for coaches. I also love working for thought leaders. So these are people who are looking at what's happening in the world and who are really taking some kind of a stand for what they believe is going to be right and standing on what side of history they believe that to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So they could be people in inclusivity and diversity studies. They could be people who are talking about like the new financial world order and like what's happening in finance for people and where we should be putting our money. I love working with people who talk about health and wellness and biohacking and how do we hack our health to get better,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can fight diseases. I mean, COVID messed up a lot of people from just the standpoint of like how much microbiomes we have. So I love
Right.
working with people that are like, cool, so how do we hack the immune system and get people optimal and functional and like going to live longer instead of shorter lives? I love stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. So but again, what you'll notice is I tend to take clients that align with who I am,
Okay.
right? So these are all things that are super important to me. So when I write about it and I take a master class from somebody else, I have a body of knowledge that I walk in the door with.
Mm.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yes.
because it's something that I have written about, research, live in my life, I walk in going, oh, actually, I can bring more to this conversation. So you're going to
Mm.
teach me a lot, and I'm going to ask you questions that are going to challenge it because I know other pieces of the puzzle that maybe you haven't thought of yet, which ultimately gives you a better book. So for me, the people I love working with, honestly, are the ones that align with me as a person, that I feel super connected to their message and I want to like put it out there. But if I have one client that I want to work with that I haven't yet, is actually a songwriter.
Mm.
So I think working with a songwriter would be really cool because songwriters have a really, like you said, they have a really cool process for how they create and
Mm-hmm.
what they do and how they get there. And so I'm going to, my white girl's going to show here, but I don't care.
Let's go.
Ed Sheeran is one of my favorite singer songwriters because he is a genre crosser. He's the most unexpected, like short little ginger kid. Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody expected him to be what he has become, right?
Right.
And
Yes, that
I
is true.
literally can't go anywhere in the world without hearing an Ed Sheeran song. Like literally, I've been in airplanes and heard Ed Sheeran songs. Like it's wild. So I want to know from somebody that has reached that level that they couldn't, that like they couldn't even have fathomed, right? When they were a
Mm-hmm.
kid. I want to know how he got from here to there. And I want to hack the creative code that he used to do it. So he
Mm-hmm.
actually writes a lot of his songs and I want to actually work with him to crack the creative code behind songwriting so that we can see how he actually produces in a way that's connected because I truly believe that Ed Sheeran's work is deeply connected not only to the psychology of
Mm-hmm.
how we experience words and language patterns, but also the spiritual realm of how we connect deeply into source energy to get all that creativity. And I think it could be a really interesting book. So if I have one book on my wish list, that's the book.
Okay, love that. Let me ask something. I'm gonna ask two questions, and I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
keep you too long.
Mm-hmm.
The first question is, what is the education that you need to become a ghostwriter for book authors? Is there any skills that is it kind of like self taught, or do we need to go to school for this? What do we
So
need to do?
yeah, so honestly, ghostwriting it comes from a whole lot of people in a whole lot of genres, right? So
Okay.
um for me, I fell into the role. I was a kid who um my best friend died when I was 9. Therapy wasn't a thing. I didn't know how to cope. The way I figured out how to cope was my dad bought me a typewriter. I'm showing my age here, my friend. My dad brought me a
Said
bought
it
me
like
a
four
typewriter.
times.
Yeah, bought me a typewriter,
Okay.
and I literally tried to bankrupt our entire family by like the amount of typewriter tape and paper I went through because
Yeah.
I just wrote and wrote and wrote. I was like Alexander Hamilton for white girls. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just was like, I'm gonna write my way out of this. Like this pain, this depression, this sadness, this fear, this anger that I feel, I'm just gonna write my way out of it. And so I just kept writing. And what happened was the more I wrote, the more I practiced, the more awards I got, the more I got attention paid to me, and things just started to happen from there. So I didn't have a formal education. Ironically, I was accepted into journalism school when I was going to go to university, and my ego won out, and I ended up going to media school instead.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to media school over journalism. I probably should have gone to journalism. It's probably my like biggest regret in life is that I didn't go to journalism school, if I'm honest. But I
Okay.
appreciate that I didn't because it's given me so much more of an interesting career. I went into media and I learned better skills around writing for stage, writing for television, writing for radio, and I was able to apply that to the work that I do as well, because at the time we weren't doing that. If you look at old books on marketing, the marketing was very different than what we do now. We have
Mm-hmm.
completely changed the game. So I went and did a media degree. The media degree for me led into working in events. Events was a great place to cut my chops because you're always trying to sell an event. So I got to work on sales and marketing when I was doing events to try and sell people into the events I was doing. And then ultimately it was a lot of PR and marketing that basically just got me where I was.
Okay.
If I was to go back though, truly, I mean, there are people who are talented, gifted writers. Those are awesome humans. Most of us just need to practice a shit ton, like write all the time. Just keep writing stuff. Even if you only write a page a day, you need to write something every day. That's the
Mm-hmm.
rule. I don't care if it's a grocery list. You need to write something every single day. So we write, and I think now I probably would have taken more marketing courses than I did, if I can be honest. I
Mm-hmm.
think that whether you're writing books or you're doing copy, a strong marketing background sets you up for success in both of those fields.
Mm-hmm.
Because people don't write a book for no reason. They want to market it and sell it, right? So
Right, that part. That leads in now I got two more questions, but that leads into a question. Anyone can write a book, but should anyone
yeah.
write a book?
No. Negative. They should
Okay.
not. There's lots of people that shouldn't. So there's so some key factors. One, I think that we need to be ethical in what we're producing and putting out into the world. So there are some things that I think should not be put out into the world, and that's a personal choice.
Mm,
And each of us gets to make that. But I truly believe that there are some things that we should not put out into the world if it's going to foster hate, create wars, create division and coercion. I have questions about that. So I personally, it's not that I want to stay PC. I mean, 9 times out of 10, the stuff I write is not PC, but
mm-hmm.
I am very clear about the potential fallout of everything that I write and what's likely to occur. So that's that marketing background again. The other people I don't think should write are people who are in the middle of it.
Mm,
So if
mm.
you are going through a really hard time, right? Um,
Right.
I have a client, for example, that was wrongly accused of a crime, went to jail for a long time, wrote his book in jail, came out, continued to write his book. Now we're working on editing it because he's now been let out, but he served like years when he shouldn't have served anything, right?
Mm,
Um, he wrote the book in from jail, and I have had to do a ton of editing because what happens when we write from the wound is it comes across very angry, unevolved, shallow at times because you haven't learned the lesson yet. You're in the middle of the lesson. You don't know what the lesson is. You're guessing, right?
mm.
So, he was 21 when he went to jail. So picture, I mean, he's almost 30 now. So picture a book written by a 21-year-old. I don't know about you, but between 21 and 30, it's a pretty large learning curve. And I
Right.
speak and know things differently than I did back when I was 21, right? So
Absolutely.
same thing happened with his book. It's not wrong that he wrote it during that part of his life. What's wrong is that we actually took that book and decided to like put it forward during that part of his life. It needed a strong edit. So
Mhm.
nothing wrong with writing it there. Just don't release it while you're in the wound.
Mm.
Needs a
And
strong
that's
editor.
an interesting point because there's a lot of people that I run across that says they want to do their memoir.
Yeah,
They want to write a book
yeah,
and they want to just put their story out there.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
you actually in the industry and you're with authors. I just wanted to know if that was something that everyone should do. I mean, just because we have the ability to write something and we think that is a great idea, I think that you touched on it perfectly. That I don't think everything should go out in the universe because you can't take it back once it's out. My
Oh, yeah. You can't.
my
Like, I wrote about having cancer, and for a decade, like, I was the cancer girl
yes, and you
until I
did
put
touch
my
on
book
that.
away. I was like, oh, I don't want to be cancer girl anymore. Let's take that book off the shelf. Thank you very much.
And you took the book off the shelf, but the people who grew up around you around the town,
Yeah.
how did you overcome that barrier?
I mean, I did it in a way that a lot of people don't. So I'm a digital nomad. So while I
Okay.
currently live in Edmonton, Alberta,
Mm-hmm.
it's a short stop. So my husband and I are digital nomads. We travel the world and live all over the globe. So
Okay.
part of it is like, if you're not home with the same people you grew up with every day, you're not exactly facing the same like stereotypes and the same
Mm.
experiences of your story, right? So we got
Right.
away from that really easily. For a lot of people, though, it's it, when people are going to put out a book, I have to remind you and remind them that whatever you put into a book, it's somewhat permanent. Even though my book is now no longer on shelves and you can't buy it, people still have my book. If you
Mhm.
search hard enough, you could find a copy of my book and read it. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, but is it how I want to be perceived now? No. Had I
Right.
thought about it when I wrote the book, I probably wouldn't have included as much stuff as I actually did.
Mm-hmm.
Because I talked very intimately about my marriage, my divorce, filing for bankruptcy, running a business, getting cancer. Like, I was very open and very vulnerable. And it was odd to have people come up to me in the street and be like, "Oh my God, I read your book," and
Mm-hmm.
feel like they knew me.
Mm. And they
It
don't.
was weird. And that goes back to that whole I don't want to be famous, which is why I'm a ghostwriter. I don't
Okay.
I don't want people coming up to me in the street being like, "Hey, I know you." I legit want to go into the grocery in my pajamas and have nobody know me. I am good with that. Like, that makes me a happy human when I can live my life and do the things I want to do without everybody sticking their nose in my business.
Right. I'm
That makes
still
me
enjoying.
incredibly happy.
I love that. You as a person, like, what kind of book genres do you enjoy?
Oh gosh. I mean, I don't get a lot of free time to read anymore is the problem.
Okay.
But when I do get a little bit of free time to read, honestly, I am a sucker for anything that's um autobiography about somebody that I admire, somebody that I think is really cool, and learning about their lives and hearing their stories. Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights, I
Mm-hmm.
loved it. So good.
Mm-hmm.
Um I love books that are weirdly about fantasy. Like, I enjoy the mind break of doing nothing
Right.
and just like living in a fairy fantasy world or dragons or whatever. That's super fun for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then honestly, I pick up a lot of books that are in similar genres to books that I'm writing or have on my roster coming up. So I usually run a roster 6 months to 2 years in advance for clients. So I know what their books are coming up. And so oftentimes I'll pick up books that are in the same genre so I can get a feel for what's already in the marketplace. So
Okay.
part of my research for writing for them is what already exists in this genre, what are people already saying, and how can we say it differently?
Love that. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. If you're looking for a ghostwriter, we got our sister Crystal in the building. Man, y'all better hire my girl. Y'all heard her. She's the bestseller. To New York Times. Not everyone has that in their backgrounds and their resumes. Crystal, like, I want to thank you for this opportunity. I did not know that I knew there were ghostwriters. I just never was able to rub elbows with one myself. So this was a treat for me as well as opportunity. So thank you for coming up and sharing your experiences and experts with us. So that concludes this episode of Let's Talk About It. So you can tune in every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And you can also check out for the short clips again at Let's Talk underscore 2025 on Instagram. And you can follow me at Twist Johnson underscore. That's TWISTJOHNSON underscore. And with that being said, I'll see you guys later.